During the flamboyant 10-year history of the American Football League, several fierce rivalries developed, but none fiercer than that between the black and the red. The Oakland Raiders and the Kansas City Chiefs. The AFL's two most successful teams fought each other 22 times during the decade. Each team won 11, and many of these were relentless struggles. In 1968, Oakland's high-powered offense appeared unstoppable. But in Kansas City, the Chiefs' defense broke down football's most prolific scoring machine. With his best receivers injured, Coach Hank Stram resurrected the old straight T formation. The Chiefs passed a record low 3 times. They ran a record high 60 times. Mike Garrett for 109 yards. Wendell Hayes for 89 yards. Robert Holmes for 95 yards. Despite adversity, the Chiefs had powered their way to a surprising victory. 2 weeks later in Oakland, quarterback Darryl LaMonica and the vengeful champion Raiders played their best game of the season and dominated the Chiefs, just as the Chiefs had dominated them 2 weeks before. By the end of the 1968 season, Oakland and Kansas City each had won 12 of 14 games, setting up the AFL's first Western Division playoff. And on a cold, wet day in Oakland, the league's first 2 Super Bowl teams finally decided a championship. By the end of the first quarter, Darryl LaMonica had fired 3 touchdown passes, and the Raiders led 21-0. LaMonica later added 2 more touchdown passes, his second to Warren Wells, and his third to Fred Biletnikoff. For the first time in 5 years, the Chiefs could not score a touchdown. The Raiders ended the Chiefs' 1968 season by giving them the worst beating in their history. In 1969, when the teams met again in Kansas City, the Chiefs were in first place, and they were ready to break the Raiders' jinx. Chief quarterback Len Dawson threw the touchdown passes this time, but they were not enough to stave off unforgettable memories. The Raiders literally stole the game, 27-24, and the Western title was again to be decided in Oakland on the season's final day. A Dawson knee injury helped dictate another conservative game for the Chiefs. They passed only 6 times. They ran 48 times. But this time they scored only 1 touchdown. The Raiders deployed their customary offense. They too scored only 1 touchdown, But for John Madden's Raiders, it was enough to defeat the Chiefs for the 4th straight time and for the 7th time in 8 games. Three weeks later, on January 5th, 1970, Hank Stram and Len Dawson returned to the Oakland Coliseum to try and solve a colossal problem: how to defeat a team which had lost only 4 games in 3 years. A team some called the finest in the game. It was now up to the fiercest rivals in AFL history to decide one final championship in the AFL's last showdown. Robert Holmes became the game's first ball carrier when he brought the opening kickoff back to the 30-yard line, where the Kansas City offense first had a chance to show what Hank Stram's strategy might be this time. First, Stram wanted to test Oakland's main strength, a pass defense, which had allowed the opposition only a 39% completion rate. The man to run the test was the Chiefs' great receiver, number 89, Otis Taylor. The first man to be tested was number 26, cornerback Nehemiah Wilson. Next, Taylor tested number 24, all-league cornerback Willie Brown. In a replay, we can see that Dawson's bomb led Taylor perfectly, but that Taylor's usually sure hands betrayed him this time. Instead of getting within easy scoring range, the Chiefs then spent most of the first half getting nowhere. Oakland's opening attack was more basic. Hand the ball to number 23, second-year running back Charlie Smith. Only a dropped third down pass prevented the Raiders from getting close enough for at least 3 points, as George Blanda's 52-yard field goal attempt fell just a few feet short. The Raiders' second attack was as basic as the first. Throw the ball to Charlie Smith. Smith's receiving seemed to open things up for Oakland's other receivers, like number 13, Rod Sherman, and number 33, Billy Cannon. LaMonica had moved into scoring range without using his 2 most potent weapons, wide receivers Fred Biletnikoff and Warren Wells. But now LaMonica sent number 25, Biletnikoff, deep against rookie cornerback Jim Marsalis, number 40. Although unsuccessful, this play set up a pass to number 81, Warren Wells, who carried to the Kansas City 3. In a replay, we can see that Biletnikoff again went deep, allowing Wells to cut behind him for the big game. On the next play, Charlie Smith followed perfect blocking to the game's first score, and the Raiders appeared to be well on their way to a championship. In the second quarter, the Raiders continued the same strategy which had been so successful in the first period. This time, however, things didn't work quite so well for the Raiders. Seven times in the first half, the Raiders turned the ball over to the Chiefs. But Kansas City's intricate offense had produced only 2 first downs and an abundance of frustration. With only 3 minutes left in the half, the Chiefs' offense suddenly began to move. Helped by several key penalties against the Oakland defense, the Chiefs found themselves beyond midfield for the first time. Dawson sent Otis Taylor down the middle to attract attention, and then threw to Frank Pitts for a 41-yard explosion to the Raiders' 1-yard line. From there, Wendell Hayes plunged into the end zone, and suddenly the game was tied as the first half ended. George Atkinson's kickoff return had the Raiders blazing back at the start of the second half. Darryl LaMonica again turned to the short passing game, which had set up the only touchdown of the first half. A low snap from center destroyed the timing between Holden LaMonica and kicker Blanda, and another easy scoring opportunity had bypassed the Raiders. On the next play, Mike Garrett ripped off the longest run of the day, 12 yards. However, Garrett's fumble was recovered by Tom Keating, who in his excitement attempted to advance the ball, much to the regret of a sideline cameraman. This unusual accident seemed to set off a chain reaction. On the next play, all-pro safety man Johnny Robinson was practically impaled on the head of an official. After Willie Mitchell replaced Robinson, LaMonica tried to throw deep, and the result was another weird play with bodies falling all over the field. The most important fallen body belonged to Darryl LaMonica, who had painfully jammed the fingers of his passing hand into the face mask of defensive end Aaron Brown. The AFL Player of the Year had to be replaced by 42-year-old George Blanda, a 20-year veteran who 10 years earlier had passed the Houston Oilers into the first AFL championship game. In Houston's Jefferson Stadium against the Los Angeles Chargers, Blanda had accounted for all the Houston points and had led the Oilers to the first AFL championship. From a handful of Houston fans in a high school stadium to the jam-packed Oakland Coliseum, Blanda had witnessed the entire history of the AFL, and it was now up to him to write the league's final chapter. First, an overthrown pass, and then from a distance approximating his age, another missed field goal. Blanda would have one more chance. On the next series, he began to move the Raiders toward a tie-breaking score. He sent Warren Wells toward the end zone for the touchdown, but Wells slipped and Emmett Thomas intercepted for the Chiefs. One old pro was through for the day, while another surveyed the wreckage of the previous play. On his run back, Thomas had been trapped at the 6-yard line. The Chiefs now had to move the ball or give it back to Oakland within range of the tie-breaking score. On first down, Dawson threw long for Frank Pitts. On second down, Robert Holmes was nearly trapped for a safety. Third down and 14 yards to go from the 2-yard line. If the Raiders could stop this play, they would probably take command of the game. In a replay, we can see that Len Dawson had perfect protection, which allowed him to find his secondary receiver, Otis Taylor, near the right sideline. Taylor's spectacular catch seemed suddenly to turn the game in the Chiefs' favor. Dawson's next target was Robert Holmes. The entire Chiefs' offense turned to opening a way for Robert the Tank to pass through. Meanwhile, the struggle continued between Otis Taylor and Nehemiah Wilson, and Dawson chose this moment to take advantage of the situation. Interference was called against Wilson, and the Chiefs were only 7 yards from the lead. In a replay, we can see why an interference call is one of the toughest any official has to make. In 2 plays, Robert Holmes accounted for the rest of the yardage to the Raider goal. And the Chiefs had won a 7-point lead after 3 quarters. Despite his injured hand, Darryl LaMonica was prepared to return for the final period. Later he said, "I am the team's leader, and since this is the case, I have to go as long as I can." All the Chiefs had to do was run out the clock and perhaps get close enough to kick the clinching field goal. From 55 yards, Jan Stenerud almost succeeded. With almost 14 minutes remaining, the Raiders had their chance to get back into the game. On first down, All-Pro linebacker Bobby Bell almost put the game away for the Chiefs. Then Darryl LaMonica got the Raiders moving toward the tying touchdown. Suddenly, an interception by Jim Kearney began a chain of events almost as bizarre as those of the third quarter. All the Chiefs had to do was run out the clock. All the Raiders had to do was score from the 24. Just run out the clock. Just score. Emmett Thomas's 62-yard dash with his second interception put the Chiefs within easy reach of Jan Stenerud's foot. Stenerud's field goal had finally given the Chiefs a commanding 10-point lead. But one more bit of madness gave the Raiders one final chance. Four down from the Kansas City 13. Emmett Thomas's third interception was just another frustrating out-of-bounds catch, but not nearly so frustrating as the rest of the game was for Darryl LaMonica and the Raiders. On last down, Aaron Brown finished the Raiders' offense for the season. It was a fitting conclusion, for the Chiefs' joy and the Raiders' frustration were due most of all to a great Kansas City defensive team. Despite a courageous effort by the AFL Player of the Year, the Western Division champion Raiders could not cope with the Chiefs' defensive team, which is finally gaining recognition as the game's toughest. The Raiders could not cope with the Chiefs' defensive line, which also is finally gaining recognition as the game's toughest. Defensive ends Aaron Brown and Jerry Mays. Tackles Buck Buchanan and Curly Culp. Buchanan, Brown, Mays, Culp. The Raiders could not cope with a defensive end named Aaron Brown. Hank Stram said, "I told them to turn it on. Give it all you've got." We did, and we beat one of the greatest teams in pro football. Maybe the greatest.